Welcome to the Legal Topic Training video by Ben Berger, Dave Hendricks, Jesse Houghton, and Mike Vincent, a project for EDL 656. The topic of this presentation is procedures to report abuse and neglect, and it's our hope that through this presentation you are given the tools and knowledge necessary in order to tackle a very oftentimes difficult scenario. When talking about child abuse and neglect, the best place to start is the letter of the law. And the Michigan Child Custody Law reads as follows: An act to require the reporting of child abuse and neglect by certain persons, to permit the reporting of child abuse and neglect by all persons, to provide for the protection of children who are abused or neglected, to authorize limited detainment in protective custody, to authorize medical examinations, to prescribe the powers and duties of the State Department of Social Services to prevent child abuse and neglect, to prescribe certain powers and duties of local law enforcement agencies, to safeguard and enhance the welfare of children and preserve family life, to provide for the appointment of legal counsel, to provide for the abrogation of privileged communications, to provide civil and criminal immunity for certain persons, to provide rules of evidence in certain cases, to provide for confidentiality of records, to provide for the expungement of certain records, to prescribe penalties, and to repeal certain acts and parts of acts. Now that we've discussed the letter of the law, let's look at 3 types of abuse that you should be looking for and that are common in these cases. We've got physical neglect, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. So these 3 we're going to break down and talk about factors and indicators within each one. We start with physical neglect, and we're going to talk about potential physical indicators, so things to look for on a child that you suspect might be a victim of physical neglect. We're going to start with unattended medical needs, lack of supervision. This one's really common: regular signs of hunger, inappropriate dress or poor hygiene, and distended stomach, emaciated, significant weight change. So these are all things that wouldn't be as obvious as some other things, but physical neglect happens quite a bit, and it's something you have to be on the lookout for. Now, how is someone who is a potential victim of physical neglect going to behave? What kinds of behaviors should you be looking for? And there are 3 that stick out. Regularly displays fatigue or listlessness. So I know a lot of students show fatigue, but if it's at times different than other students or happens more often, they're falling asleep in class, that could be a sign of physical neglect. Steals or hoards foods and begs from classmates. This is something to look for not in the classroom and the cafeteria or other areas if they're taking on these behaviors. And reports that no caretaker is at home. So oftentimes if they're vocalizing that they may not be under any supervision in times that they should be at the house, then this would be another indicator of physical neglect. Moving on to potential physical indicators for physical abuse. And anytime we're talking about abuse, we're going to be looking for things that might pop out a little bit more than they may in physical neglect. So we've got unexplained bruises, various stages of healings. As they're happening, they heal at different rates, so looking for bruises. Adult or human bite marks, bald spots or missing clumps of hair, unexplained burns or scalds, unexplained fractures, skin lacerations, punctures or abrasions, swollen lips or chipped teeth, linear or parallel marks on cheeks and temple area. So some of these jump out to me more than others. Bruises we're always looking for, and some of these are just extremely sad to say, but all of these come from cases in the past, so they are things we have to be looking for. This is more common sense, looking for red flags and injuries on a child, and this would be easier to identify at times than physical neglect. Now, how is someone going to behave when they're a victim of physical abuse? So behavioral indicators. Self-destructive or self-mutilation. If they're withdrawn or aggressive, either of those behavioral extremes will work. Uncomfortable or skittish whenever there's physical contact. If they arrive to school late or stay late as if they don't want to go home. Chronic runaway, that's more common as we get to the middle school and high school ages. Complains of soreness or moves uncomfortably, wears clothing inappropriate to weather to cover body, lack of impulse control, so there's inappropriate outbursts. So these are behavioral indicators that would accompany physical indicators with physical abuse. Now we're going to talk about potential physical indicators of sexual abuse. And let me start by saying that just this list is not all inclusive. Just because it's on here doesn't mean it's going to always be the case, or if we left something off, doesn't mean that that can't be a possibility. But these are common symptoms or indicators of sexual abuse. Pain or itching in a genital area, bruises or bleeding in genital area, sexually transmitted disease, frequent urinary or yeast infections, extreme or sudden weight change, and pregnancy under 12 years of age. So with sexual abuse, physical indicators might be a little harder to identify, but when paired with behavioral indicators, there could be some red flags that you could act upon. The behavioral indicators of sexual abuse are extremely important because the physical indicators can be a little tougher to find. So you'll have to look closely for these and make a judgment in pairing them with any physical indicators if when deciding if there's a case to act on. Sexual abuse behavioral indicators include withdrawn or chronic depression, sexual behaviors or references that are unusual for the child's age, seductive or promiscuous behavior, poor self-esteem, self-devaluation, lack of confidence, suicide attempts, and hysteria or lack of emotional control. Now that we've talked about physical and behavioral indicators of 3 common types of child abuse or neglect, we're going to talk about who's responsible to act and how they should do that. So these people are called the mandated reporters. And a mandated reporter is an individual who have a background or area of expertise in direct contact with children. In this case, we're all in the business of education, so everyone in this building listening to this presentation would fall under the category of a mandated reporter. The mandated reporter is the person that files the report, and they're confirmed at almost double the rate of reports filed by individuals that are not a mandated reporter. So a mandated reporter, you're in a position of great power and understanding, so it is important that you act on these situations. Now, there is a mandated reporter's law, and I don't want to get boggled down in the letter of the law here because the important thing to convey is that you are a mandated reporter. In a mandated reporter, the law starts by saying it's an individual required to report child abuse or neglect in a written report, transmitting report to county department, copies to prosecuting attorney and probate court. So what this is basically saying is you have to be the person to start this paper trail, and it's a very important job. Aside from people in education, there's other types of professions that fall under the mandated reporter category. Things like physicians, dentist, nurse, counselor, and then all the areas we talked about within education. Now the important part, we're going to walk you through the steps to reporting, and the steps are very simple, and after this presentation it is our hope that you'll be able to report if you come across a situation, and you'll have all the tools that you need. So step 1, mandated reporters are required to make an immediate verbal report to CPS, which is Child Protective Services, when they suspect child abuse or neglect. And it's as simple as calling this number, and we've listed it here. So the first step, calling CPS, 855-444-3911. Step number 2, a written report must be submitted to CPS, Child Protective Services, within 72 hours of the verbal report. The written report is submitted on a DHS 3200 form. You'll see I have the form attached here. It's a very simple form with instructions that are numbered that you have to follow. So number 1 is the date. 2, listing of the children and information like birth date, social, sex, race, etc. So listing information of the child. As you move down, basic information continues. Step 14 source of complaint. So there's a reporter code, whether you're a teacher, administrator, etc. And then there's information about yourself, reporting person's name, etc. So on this first side of this form, it's very self-explanatory and it walks you through the process. The back side of the form is somewhat similar. This is to be completed by medical personnel when physical examination has been done. So the back side has that top portion, which is to be completed by medical personnel, and then instructions or general information about the form at the bottom. So before you fill out the form, you may want to reference the bottom portion where it's titled General Information, and it walks you through step by step what you need to do. Step 3 requires mandated reporters to notify the head of their organization of the report. So principal would be a good place to start, and then they may go to the superintendent and notify them. But it's important that you notify your immediate superior and get the information to the people that need to be aware of it. So it's as simple as 3 steps. Your job is verbal, written, report. So if you remember that the first thing you need to do is call CPS, and then you need to fill out that 3200 form, and then you need to notify the head of your organization, which would be a principal or superintendent. So it's very easy, 3 simple steps, and next we're going to tell you about what happens in the process after that. But for all intents and purposes, you are done with your portion of the reporting. So under the what happens next category, all of this does not include you. There are 3 things that could happen to a report. They can be assigned for investigation, rejected, or transferred to another agency for investigation, like law enforcement or Bureau of Child and Adult Licensing. So there's 3 options with your report, and they are listed here. Now we're going to give you some possible scenarios, and all of these scenarios have happened in the past, and we want you to read the scenario and follow the instructions on if you should file a report or not, and if you don't, what action should be taken, if any. So with each scenario, please take some time to think about what you would do and then indicate that when requested. Scenario number 1. A student comes up to you and says to be careful around her because, quote, my mom burned me with a cigarette. Now I want you to take some time to think about, do you file a report based upon this claim? Scenario number 2. A child is sent home with lice for the 6th time in 2 months. Do you file a report? Scenario number 3. A student enters class and informs you that his dad hit him in the stomach so hard that he threw up. Do you file a report? Scenario number 4. You're in the situation of reporting abuse or neglect on the same student for the 8th time. Do you still file a report? Now, after all of the slides and information that you've gotten, I hope that you realize how simple it is. 3 steps to report child abuse or neglect. And it's your job as a mandated reporter to report every time you suspect possible abuse and or neglect within 24 hours. So every time that you suspect it, you have to report it.